All right. Thank you, guys. My name is Graf, and today I'm going to be presenting on automating SDDC tasks with PowerCLI. So I've been using PowerCLI a lot, especially lately, and I've been enjoying the benefits of using that, and I figured I'd share a few things that I've learned. So, you know, how many times are we doing certain tasks or doing something in our work, and you know, maybe we're putting out a fire trying to use a garden hose? You know, how many times is what you're doing just not going to cut it? What are we doing in our work? What are we doing with our processes that really we could be automating in a better fashion? How can we speed that up? How can we have better performance? Okay. Do we need something bigger? At what point do we go from using a garden hose to a fire hose to fight our fires, right? So as I've been working at automating different pieces of the SDDC, I found that what we really need to do is not so much increase the size of our scripts, but increase the size of our fire hose. Well, how do we do that? PowerShell and PowerCLI is a single-threaded application. So as we go and we try and run a command, we end up running a command and then waiting for that one to finish before it moves on to a next. And so as we go through a big script, we might see that it takes us, say, 5 or 10 minutes to run through because it waits for one task to finish before moving on to the other. But what happens if we go and we make that a multi-threaded script or multi-threaded task? What does that do? What that does for us is it allows us to go essentially from a one-lane road to a wide multi-lane highway. What we can do at this point is we can go in and we can run one task that might take a while at the beginning and then kick off other tasks at the exact same time and let them run asynchronously. So how do we do that? One of the ways is to use start jobs. Using jobs is a way that we can kick off other scripts, essentially create another road or another PowerShell session as we're working on tasks. So, for example, for those of you that are on the Twitter sphere, I talked with a guy that needed some help. He needed to kick off a lot of clones, and at the same time, he wanted to inflate the disks of those clones. If you do that through the C# client, or even through just a normal script, it'll go through and do one at a time. It'll clone it and then inflate, clone and inflate. So what he said is, I really want to be able to do all this at the same time. How do I do that? And so that's what we did, is we implemented jobs. And what that allowed us to do is we were able to create a job that would go through and inflate, or would clone, say, 5 virtual machines at a time, each job. So we run 3 or 4 of those at the same time, and we get 20 clones that are starting asynchronously. And then at the same time, we kick off another script that does jobs just like this, that goes through and inflates those at the same time. So as you sit there and you watch vSphere recent tasks, you see them start filling up because everything's running at the same time. Now, it's a little tricky how it works. When you kick off a job in PowerShell, one of the things you have to do is you have to give it a script block. Essentially, you have to write the code that's going to be in the script or in the job beforehand, before you kick it off, and you need to be able to pass certain variables, depending on what you're doing, into that script. So as you can see here at the bottom of my slides, we kick off a job with a specific job name, and we give it a script as we stated up above that and below the image. And then the argument lists are any of the variables that we want to go ahead and pass into those jobs. So for example, if we're doing things with vSphere, or we want to connect into another vCenter session, then you may connect in, you may pass through the variables of like your vCenter, your admin username, and your password, and then the virtual machines or objects that you're going to work with. All those need to be passed through in that argument list. So if you're running these subjobs, you don't have that open in your main PowerShell window. How do you know when something's finished, right? Well, you don't have to be telepathic to know when these finish. There are different things that we can leverage that will tell us. One of the things that I leverage a lot is using event logs. So if I have 20 jobs running and I want to know when each one finishes, I can tell it to create an event log in Windows that tells me that one's done. And I can have a counter running on my main session that tells me, it can give me a count of how many of these have completed, how many of these event logs have come through. I have some pieces of those scripts down below too, so you can see that for an example. Another thing, like I sort of mentioned there, is using timers. So within PowerShell, you can use things like Windows Forms and Windows Timers that will go through and tick at the frequency that you choose, and every time that it ticks through, it checks for something. It checks for an event log. It checks for something in your environment to change, and all that can be set and then checked through the main PowerShell session. The other thing you can do is you can check the actual state of the job. Using timers, you can run the get job command, which will then tell you the state of each one, if it's running, if it's failed, if it's completed. And if you're doing that with the timer, it will check it every time that it ticks through, and you can see when all the jobs have finished with the completed. All right, jumping ship a little bit. Another thing that I use a lot besides jobs is copy VM guest file. And it's something that not many people know about, but it's very handy to use. So when you set up a virtual machine and you need a file, if you can't copy and paste for some reason, or you can't RDP in and use the copy and paste functions there, how do you get files across? You probably upload it to Dropbox, right? And then you get on your machine and you download it, or you set up a network share, and all these things take time. With copy VM guest file, if the file is on your local machine that you're running the PowerShell session on, you can actually specify the files or the folders and tell it which virtual machine to place it onto and where to place it, and it'll do it through that session. So, for example, as I did an unattended Windows installation, and I wanted to push across certain files for vCloud Automation Center prereqs, so .NET and SQL Express. Instead of having to go and download those once I had provisioned that virtual machine, I used the copy VM guest file, and that allowed me to push those files across, and within a few seconds I had those on there, and I was able to also run those through invoke VM script. So this is also very handy. You can do it both ways. You can actually pull files off of those virtual machines to your local machine, or you can push them from your local machine to the target virtual machine. This right here, I have a bit.ly address here for those that are interested in understanding how to make ISOs through PowerShell. This has become very handy for me, and when I'm working with a lot of files and I want to be able to create an ISO that I then mount to a virtual machine, I have a link here to a function that was created and posted up on one of the Microsoft websites on how to do that. And I have the code up above that essentially you specify a target folder, and the target media, so is it a CDR, is it DVD, it has all the notes in the function as well, but you're able to go ahead and this will actually create an ISO leveraging PowerShell that you can then add up, upload to the data store either manually or also using PowerShell, and connect into and start using with your virtual machines very quickly. And those are a few of my tips for automating the SDDC with PowerCLI. Thank you very much.